Good morning, Evan.
Vuyo, let's start with just sort of recap of the week's events and then also tell us why are we in Mpumalanga, which traditionally is an ANC stronghold in any case.
Well, it is indeed a stronghold, but I think traditionally it's important to point out that traditionally the ANC has sort of rotated this sort of thing. But obviously in an election year, they would want that show of force, and they would want to go to a place where they know that it's their stronghold. I mean, it works certainly from the kind of image that they would want to project. So Mpumalanga is one of those provinces that where the ANC is quite strong. Of course, things that don't help the situation right now is the fact that, for instance, if you look at newspaper reports this morning, there's a story around the premier of the province, who is a leader of the ANC, having bought his office, having bought 3 expensive vehicles, which suggests that the belt tightening exercise that Pravin Gordhan has been talking about is not a consideration or an issue at all here. But be that as it may, I think the ANC is confident that on the ground it is very strong. So Mpumalanga is the province of choice.
And this week's been a pivotal week. We've had the January 8th statement and the Election Manifesto will be launched this week. You've been on the beat and on the trail. Just tell us what happened the last couple of days.
Well, over the last couple of days, we've seen leaders, the top 6, especially of the African National Congress, President Jacob Zuma, his deputy, Cyril Ramaphosa, Gwede Mantashe, the Secretary General, Baleka Mbete, the chairperson, Zweli Mkhize, the Treasurer General, and Jesse Duarte, the Deputy Secretary General, all of them going around the province, basically touching base, so to speak, with the membership, with the party faithful, but also those that the ANC would want to make sure that even though they may not be on their membership list, but certainly would support the ANC and what it stands for. So they have been doing walkabouts, they have been doing door-to-door campaigning, explaining to them where the ANC stands on certain issues. But I think of particular significance for me was the fact that during those walkabouts and during those door-to-door visits, you actually saw the ANC beginning to talk directly to the issues that many analysts, journalists, and everyone who dares to comment on what is going on have been talking about. They have been talking about Ngandla. They have been talking about corruption. They have been talking about jobs. They have been talking about the economy. But some of us would argue perhaps too little, too late. But remember, we still have a few months ahead of us, which will be fully fledged electioneering from all parties. So maybe they will get a chance to do that. But this being perhaps the most, perhaps the only or one of very few opportunities that the top leadership of that notwithstanding that the fact that the provincial and local leadership will be doing the campaigning, but perhaps for the top leadership, this is probably the only or one of very few opportunities that they will have to speak to the people of Mpumalanga. I think they should have done more of that than they are doing at the moment. But I guess they have done something, and that would hopefully count for something.
Vuyo, the NEC meeting that took place this week was seen to be quite significant. How did you read the outcomes from this meeting?
To be honest, it was a little disappointing. If you look at, if you were at yesterday's media briefing, which Gwede Mantashe conducted, it was a little. Well, the explanation to that is that the NEC considered the state of readiness for the election. So, in other words, suggesting that perhaps they didn't dwell or delve deeply into a whole host of other issues. But Gwede Mantashe did say that, throughout the year, the NEC has been looking at several issues affecting or that the ANC has had to deal with. So this one had to deal specifically or spent most of its time looking at the state of readiness for the election. That is perhaps the explanation, maybe a plausible one, but certainly given the enormity of challenges facing the ANC, one would have thought that they would have dug a little bit deeper into those. But of course, several other issues were touched on, like unity within the ANC, but also within the broader alliance. Yeah. Jeff Kadebe indicating this morning that that issue is very much on top of their agenda. But on a very practical, or certainly from what the leaders have been saying, there doesn't seem to be evidence that that issue has actually been dealt with adequately. But perhaps over the next few weeks and months, we will see evidence of that. But as things stand, there isn't much evidence of that. And if you look at what was said, the statement that was issued yesterday, but also the issues that were tackled at that particular briefing, there isn't much evidence that a much deeper analysis and a coherent and quite considered strategy is something that has really been looked into. But maybe the ANC is going to prove us wrong.
Earlier in the week, before the meeting, Vuyo, there was a lot of talk about this meeting dealing with the looming fracture within the Labour Federation and the possible withdrawal of NUMSA and how that would affect the ANC going into the election. This being a very, very important facet within the alliance. Was there any resolution taken at this meeting, or is there any information around a resolution as to how they will tackle this?
Well, beyond saying they are working tirelessly to make sure that there is unity and the singularity of purpose, beyond saying the manifesto is in fact a product not only of roadshows and consultations with the broader sort of public, but in particular with alliance formations, namely COSATU and the SACP. But beyond that rhetoric, if you like, nothing came through by way of like concrete examples pointing to that, or evidence that is indeed the case. But of course, we do know. We've been speaking to leaders of COSATU. We've been speaking to leaders of the SACP who have been part of the process that led to the drafting of the manifesto. But those people seem content that their grievances have been taken into account. They seem content that their issues have been addressed, certainly in the manifesto. But whether in reality and beyond electioneering, and whether in fact this is not a sign or rather a product of everyone coming together for the sake of the election, that hasn't come through. In other words, what we're seeing is what typically happens during elections, where the ANC comes together. Everyone says it is important for us to show unity so that our enemies cannot exploit our disunity. But whether the fundamental issues have in fact been addressed, that remains a moot point. Because you will recall that in the run-up to where we are right now, several issues were raised. Even though, COSATU, as divided as it is united around the issue of e-tolls. COSATU, as divided as it is united around the issue of labor brokers. It is united around its opposition to sections of the National Development Plan and the youth wage subsidy. Yeah. So those issues, there doesn't seem to be evidence that those issues have been addressed adequately. In fact, what comes through is that the ANC has sort of parked a lot of those issues and perhaps convinced the two alliance formations that, look, let's focus on the election now and deal with the rest of the issues a little later perhaps.
Vuyo, thank you very much for that contribution today. We look forward to what comes out over the weekend as the campaign trail really kicks off with the launch of the manifesto. That is our contributing editor, Vuyo Mvoko, who is in Nelspruit in Mpumalanga.